Today we are going to be reading Chapter 12 of Heart and Soul. Chapter 12 is titled Revolution, and the quote for today says, "We knew we were going to change the world." And that quote is from Angela Davis, Revolutionary. And the first picture here says Southern Woolworths Cafe. Okay. So we're going to learn a little bit more about what that picture means in a second. All right. Something good had started in Montgomery, and it spread across the country. Young people grabbed hold of the movement the grown folks had started and took it over. To show how different they were from their parents' generation, they started wearing their hair long and their clothes became louder and more colorful. And the music, honey, the music was even louder and more soulful. The sounds of angry electric guitars and powerful drums echoed through our neighborhoods as we sang along with James Brown. "Say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud," and Sam Cooke, "A change is gonna come." College kids started to challenge the segregation laws, starting with a Woolworths Cafe in Greensboro, North Carolina. So a cafe is like a restaurant. You have a lunch counter and tables, and you go and you can sit and eat. Okay? So at that point, remember in the South that the cafes and restaurants were segregated. A lot of cafes wouldn't allow even African Americans to eat inside. If they wanted food, they would have to pick it up or get it from a separate window. They couldn't eat at the lunch counter where the white customers sat. So, Greensboro, North Carolina. 4 black students just went in there and sat down at the white folks' lunch counter. They were later put in jail, but people heard about it and started doing it all over the South. Going into white-only movie theaters, pools, churches, libraries, and such, trying to break Jim Crow laws. Dr. King joined them too. And there were even a number of us older folks who felt brave enough to get on board. We called ourselves Freedom Riders, and we filled cars and buses with white and black folks and rode all over the South breaking the segregation laws. This was a very dangerous thing, mind you. This was a very dangerous thing, mind you. Those of us who were lucky were merely arrested and put in jail for a few days, but many others were beaten very badly by policemen and mobs of white townsfolk, and their buses and cars were burned. 3 years later, Ku Klux Klan members killed not only black folks, but some of the white folks who were helping organize the movement and get black folks registered to vote. And believe me when I tell you that it made everybody feel a little scared. But we kept moving forward. Like Dr. King told us, we've come too far to turn back now. So what they're doing, and like Freedom Riders and the lunch counters and the sit-ins, is they would specifically go to places that they said black folks could not go to. And they would literally just go and sit there until they were escorted out by the police. Or, hopefully, the idea being until they were served. And there's actually a lot of training that would involve in this. When people wanted to join these demonstrations and these sit-ins and go sit at these lunch counters, they actually had to be trained how to do it. Because as you can imagine, it's really hard to go sit somewhere when you are not allowed to fight back. So remember, this is supposed to be peaceful protest. The whole idea is that you don't fight the people physically. Okay? You stand up against unfair laws, but you do it peacefully. So when they would sit at these lunch counters, people would throw stuff at them, pour stuff on them, yell in their faces, spit at them, surround them, and they had to sit there staring forward and not responding to any of the hateful things that people were doing. Now, a lot of you might think that that sounds crazy, they should fight back, but let me tell you, they're not fighting back proved more powerful than turning around and slugging the person in the face who's being rude to them. Because then they would just get arrested and say, look, see, these people are just violent. They're just causing trouble. Okay? But if they protested and didn't cause trouble, and other people were violent and mean to them, then it would show that they were not the ones who were being unjust and unfair. So they didn't want their protest to be about fighting. They wanted their protest to be about fairness. So and it was dangerous. People were harassed. Some people were killed. Some people's houses were burned. Birmingham, Alabama was called Bombingham because the amount of bombs that were set off at people's houses, especially at Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s house. So there were other leaders in the movement like A. Philip Randolph, Malcolm X, Adam Powell, Fannie Lou Hamer, and Medgar Evers. But it was Dr. King who spoke loudest of all. His message was clear. We cannot win this battle with violence. We cannot win it with hate. We can only win it with persistence, love, and nonviolence. And by reminding the nation and the people on Capitol Hill that our forefathers made a promise of freedom and justice for all when they signed that paper, we would become the nation's moral conscience and fight the battle for justice and equality. Dr. King marched us all over the South trying to get the attention of the whole country. We just loved him and would have followed him anywhere. When he spoke, his powerful voice gave you chills. It shook your spirit and got you excited and calmed you when you were scared. He was patient and took time to listen to everybody, even the children. And he was handsome too, honey, which didn't hurt one bit. In May of 1963, Dr. King and his team went down to Birmingham, Alabama, the most dangerous place in the South for black folks. They went to work marching people all over the city and got everyone's attention when they marched 600 children through Kelly Ingram Park. Most were teenagers, but some were as young as 6 years old. They skipped school to march on downtown Birmingham, holding hands and singing. Policemen ordered them to stop and then sicked their dogs on them and sprayed them with fire hoses. The water was strong enough to knock the bark off a tree, and they turned it on the children. It knocked them down and ripped their shirts off, even pinned them up against buildings and trees. It was downright shameful. Pictures of the march were shown on television screens and in newspapers all over the world. President John F. Kennedy had no choice but to settle things in Birmingham. And this is a picture that's supposed to be of looking at what's happening in Kelly Ingram Park on a black and white TV. You can kind of see the fire hose there sprayed at the children. So this was kind of like a real thing. Like Dr. King went down to Birmingham, Alabama to organize a march and a protest. And it was dangerous in Birmingham. And a lot of the adults were like, eh. And so the kids were like, hey, they stood up. We'll do it. We'll do it. And Dr. King at first was like, no, it's too dangerous. And basically what happened is there was a call for people to show up at the Baptist church. And they were going to start the march from there. And so radio stations and kids all kind of got a signal together that they were going to go anyway, even though they were told that they shouldn't go. And that if the adults weren't going to march, they were going to march. And so a signal was set out on the radio stations at a certain time of day. And all these kids were leaving schools, walking out the doors, and walking into the back of the 2nd Street Baptist Church and filling it up. And then they were marching out the front. And the point was to march to the downtown where everything was segregated. But they didn't make it that far. They didn't make it past the park. And what would happen is the police officers they tried to get them to stop. They brought in dogs. They sprayed them with fire hoses. They did all sorts of stuff to get them to stop from marching downtown. And then started arresting them. And they started arresting so many children, they were filling up buses. But more children kept coming in the back of the church and marching back out the front. They just kept coming and coming and coming. And it got so crazy busy that in the middle of the day, they actually agreed to take a lunch break. Like, you stop marching out of the church, we'll stop shooting you with fire hoses, and we're going to take a lunch break. And then they continued. And they did this for a couple days. And they had so many children arrested that they had to start putting them in the fairgrounds, the fenced-in fairgrounds area where the horse stalls and stuff would be, because they didn't have room for them in the jails. And so you can imagine a lot of the children were scared. At first, it seemed like it would be okay, but it did become scary for a lot of them, especially younger children. There were some very young children, not just teenagers, who ended up participating and being arrested. But obviously, this got the attention of the country, and they had to do something about it. They couldn't just let this go and have children just be blasted and dogs attacking them and thrown in jail just because they wanted to march downtown into areas that were considered whites only. We're going to stop there for today because I did a lot of talking, and we'll pick up the rest of the chapter tomorrow.